Welcome to Mind Stretch, an interactive Q&A series designed to improve mental flexibility and strength, brought to you by the Well Winner. My name is ALANA. I'm a licensed master social worker, and I've been a therapist with a variety of populations, including children and adolescents. I was also a competitive Irish dancer for 15 years. A quick reminder that any information shared through our platform or through this series is not a replacement for therapy or the therapeutic relationship. There is a big difference between receiving information from a mental health professional on social media and in the context of a therapeutic relationship. If you have any questions, we have a disclaimer on our Instagram page and a resources tab for more information. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions for this series. I was absolutely floored with all of the thoughtful submissions, and I encourage you to keep your eyes peeled for that questions bubble in our stories in the future to ask me whatever is on your mind. The question that I will be diving into today is a good one. It is submitted from a brilliant follower who asked, how do we improve ourselves without being overly self-critical? And what I love about the way this follower asked this question is that it highlights the most important piece of navigating self-criticism, which is our response to it. I want to start with a little bit of background on how our brains and bodies respond to judgment in general. So it can be super helpful to make a judgment. If we think about how we keep ourselves safe when we're crossing the road, for example, we get to the side of the road, we then see a car coming, we make a judgment that it wouldn't be safe to cross. Our brain sends that information to our body, our nervous system is activated, and we stay put. We keep ourselves safe. But what happens when the threat isn't external, isn't about a car, it's actually internal, and it has to do with the judgments we're making about ourselves? What happens then when it doesn't feel safe to be in our own bodies? Believe it or not, our brains are not good at differentiating between external threats and internal threats. If it feels like a threat, it's going to send off all the same signals, whether it's about a car or whether it's a criticism about ourselves. So those same responses that we would have when we were in fight or flight mode from a legitimate external danger might mirror themselves when we become, to use this follower's language, overly self-critical. I call that red zone criticism. And that might look like our palms start sweating, our heart starts racing, we have difficulty breathing, maybe we become irritable with the people around us, we get angry, we feel scared, we feel really tense and frustrated. And that is our body responding to the threat of our own thoughts. Let's think of some examples. Maybe my shuffles aren't good enough, I'm not a good dancer, my stamina is horrible, I should have done better at that fesh. These are examples of what we would call negative cognitions or negative thought patterns. I like to call it negative self-talk. Keeps it super easy. It sounds exactly like what it is, which is us speaking to ourselves in a way that's really negative. And a lot of the time that will have the impact of making us feel demotivated and diminished, and it will feel like we are at odds with ourselves, like there's tension within us. And that's when we've entered the red zone. That's when there's work to be done, and that is where I'm going to start my answer to this follower's question. So there are a couple of things that I suggest when it comes to changing or addressing and navigating self-criticism, or as we've just labeled it, negative self-talk. The first step is going to be improve awareness. The second step is going to be reframing, or overall just changing our relationship to the negative self-talk. And then hopefully the outcome is not getting rid of it, because we're realistic and we're humans and we're going to sometimes say things that aren't very nice about ourselves, because it's an ongoing process and it's a practice. But the goal is not to get rid of it, to reduce the frequency of negative self-talk and hopefully the impact of that negative self-talk on our physiological response. So let's jump to step number one, improving awareness. How do we do that? I actually have some pretty tactical recommendations. I would recommend getting a journal. I would recommend starting a list in your notes app. Red zone self-talk, red zone criticisms, negative self-talk, you can label it whatever you want, and start keeping an active journal of all of the negative thoughts that you have about yourself. If it feels like they're the most prevalent when you're dancing, if that feels like where you want to start, then I would recommend keeping that list going when it's as fresh as possible. So like during practice, during class, after a competition. For me, I mean, self-talk is universal. It doesn't just happen, negative self-talk, but self-talk in general. We're talking to ourselves all day long, and that negative self-talk doesn't just happen in a vacuum, doesn't just happen, at 5 p.m. every day. So getting in the habit of having that journal or that notes page nearby could be really useful, because for me, self-talk comes up sometimes in social interactions. If I walk away and I think, oh, why did I do that, or why did I say that? Sometimes it happens at work. Maybe it happens with schoolwork, like, I should have gotten this grade on a test, or I'm no good at this, whatever it is. We're constantly critiquing ourselves. It's really a habitual instinct, and that awareness is going to help us break the cycle. So keeping a list of negative thoughts as they come up is going to be step number one. Now, when we look at that list, there are a couple things we can do with it. We look at a specific thought. Maybe my shuffles aren't strong enough. My shuffles are bad even. And we look at that and we say, maybe we say, that's not true. I was just having a bad day. I was really down on myself. It's not helpful. It's not true. Or that might even be easier with something more like, I'm a bad dancer. Like, that's definitely not helpful or true. So what we do with something like that, when we notice that kind of negative self-talk, we can either physically write it down on a piece of paper, crumple it up, and throw it out because it's trash. Or we can visualize that. We can say, all right, I'm writing it down on a piece of paper, I'm crumbling it up in my brain, and I'm throwing it out. That is trash. I recognize that as negative self-talk, and that is not useful to me. I think this is also an example of, if you're not ready to write it down in a notebook or keep track of it in written form, being able to label it as negative self-talk and then visualize your response to it, so being able to crumple it up in your brain and throw it out, is going to be part of that awareness and then response process. But then with thoughts that are a little bit less extreme, so not just I'm a horrible dancer, but let's go back to the shuffles piece. My shuffles are not good enough. That has a little bit of that has a nugget of information in it. You'll hear me say this a lot. I think most of our experiences have something to offer us. Most of what we experience, every thought, every feeling, it has information for us. So recognizing the thought, becoming aware of it, noticing it, deciding, okay, maybe there is something helpful in this, and then reframing it is going to be step number two. We call this, a reframe is a great word for it, or cognitive restructuring. What it really means is saying, this is a piece of negative self-talk. I don't want it to be negative. I don't want to be attacking myself, but I do see there's a piece of information in there, and I want to transform it into something useful. And that's going to be that piece that this follower identified in the question, which is working to improve ourselves. So my shuffles are not good enough. Okay, I noticed that I want to improve my shuffles. So maybe, you can turn this into as actionable a goal as you want. Maybe you just transform that into, I'd like to improve my shuffles. Maybe you get more specific and you say, I want my shuffles to be stronger or louder, or I would like to do 50 shuffles a day. It's up to you how actionable you want to get with the goal, but the point is you're taking something that was a piece of negative self-talk and you're reframing it into something actionable and positive. Believe it or not, the opposite of negative self-talk is called positive self-talk. So it's super simple in that regard. Of course, it's a lot easier said than done. It's a lot harder in practice, but if you are continuing to recognize the thoughts as they come up and you are working on ways to reframe them, you are absolutely doing the work to improve your relationship to self-criticism. And again, all these can be columns in a notebook. Maybe you write some positive self-talk down on Post-its that you can reference in, really fraught situations, when we're just feeling really down. I do that. The last piece is going to be more of like an overarching reframe, our relationship to ourselves under pressure. I can't discuss negative self-talk without thinking about something that really helped me, which was deciding to make a shift from me versus myself to me with myself. And that happens when I understood that a lot of times when we're under pressure, our instinct is to take us out of the present moment. Fear can be really powerful, and it can drive us into the past, where we start attacking ourselves for not prepping hard enough to get us to this point and to be stronger in this moment. It can also jump to the future self, where we've idealized some stronger version of ourselves and now we're mad at our present self. But there's all this tension that comes up when we feel under pressure. And if we're talking about the context of preparing for a competition, we're talking about physical pressure, right? So we're talking about shortness of breath while dancing, we're talking about lactic acid buildup, we're talking about muscles burning, and that's a really high pressure situation and the perfect recipe to just cue the negative self-talk, cue the attack on ourselves. Let's go, let's get in this cycle. You're not strong enough, your stamina stinks, you should be doing better than this, you should, your click should be higher. It all goes on loop. But what I like to do in that moment is I notice it. I actually, honestly, in that moment, I don't have time to reframe when I'm like in the thick of training. So I throw it out and I bring in some positive self-talk, and I remind myself that I am on my own team. And I speak to myself. I say, we're on the same team, Alana. This is not you versus yourself. Be in this moment. Meet yourself where you are. Take it beat by beat and keep going. And the more you can bring yourself back to the present moment in those times of high stress and overwhelm, whether that's physical stress, whether you're on the stage and you're pushing yourself beyond what feels physically possible, or whether you're waiting for results and you're completely overwhelmed with emotions and just the tension that comes with that, whether you're leaving class where nothing is particularly stressful, but there's just that buildup of expectations and all that comes with working towards a goal. So it's just about reminding yourself that you are on the same team. I think that's a really important larger reframe, and I'd highly recommend considering that when you're doing this work with navigating self-criticism. In terms of positive self-talk, feel free to take anything that I shared today or come up with your own. And I also invite you to share it with us on social media. Share any of your feedback that you have on any of the content that we put out. We love hearing from you. Honestly, everything that we do through the Well Winner is part of a conversation that we think is so important, and being able to have that conversation with you means the world to us. So please share your thoughts, comments, feelings, feedback, and continue to do so. Before I wrap up, before we kind of summarize all we've gone over today, we're improving awareness, we're visualizing, removing any unhelpful negative self-talk. We're learning how to reframe negative self-talk and make a list of positive self-talk to bring in during those moments of high stress. We're learning how to interject when that negative self-talk comes in as a habitual response to high stress, and put space between those thoughts and what's going on for us in the present moment, so that we can remind ourselves that we are on the same team. All of this is such juicy work to be done when it comes to navigating red zone criticism. To answer this follower's question, that's the work, that's the practice in learning how to improve ourselves, learning how to transform and reframe negative self-talk and criticism, things that make our body feel like we're literally attacking it, and turning that into actionable goals and turning that into self-compassion. Self-compassion is a huge antidote to that nervous system response that I was describing earlier. So that's the work and that's the practice. The last thing I want to leave you with today is exactly that, a reminder that this is a practice. So just like anything else that's worth working towards, it requires that you continue to show up, that you continue to commit to the work, that you do it over and over and over again. It's not about an end goal, it's not about a result, it's not about winning. It's about being with yourself in the present moment and trying again and again and again. And I promise you, and I don't promise much, trust me, because every experience is different for every person, but I promise you, if you practice this, it will get easier, you will get better. It's pretty foolproof in that way, and I love that about improving awareness of our own thoughts. So please take what you need and give it a try. I want to thank you all for joining the very first session of the Mind Stretch. It's been such a privilege. I will see you next time.